Per Strömbäck från dataspelsbranschen här.
Hey, Håkan. All right. Hey, folks. Great to be here. I must say, Richard's opening this morning is going to be a hard act to follow. It's one of the best I've seen, and I've been doing this since 1996. But it's my pleasure to give you the latest bragging numbers of how well the companies in the Swedish games industry are doing. And then I'm also honored with the task of hosting the end panel. So I won't bore you for the whole hour. I have 4 more people joining me for that task. So you'll get to know them in a minute. Oh, some of them you've already met. And I'm going to talk for a while about some numbers and the state of the industry, and then I'll share some of my own theories of why Sweden, of all places, have become such a force in the global games industry. It's like that bumblebee that shouldn't be able to fly, but it does so anyway. So before I start, how many here are looking for a career in the games industry? How many want to make games for a job? Jobs for a game. Okay, that's pretty good. And the rest of you, why are you here? And, who wants to have their own company? All right. And the rest would prefer a career working for those guys, right? And for those, and some of that's great. That's great. I've run my own game studio. It's good fun. And then if you don't make it, you can work for some of the others in this room. So make sure you be friends with them, not competitors. And if you make it, great, because then I can brag about your success. All right. So this is me. I've been a game developer. I've been a games publisher. Now I'm in my 12th year working for the industry association. It's strange they don't kick me out yet, but I guess nobody else wants this job. So anyway, this beautiful cover art is my contribution to the history of games. Rock Manager was released in 2001 in 14 countries. It failed 14 times. I moved on. I stopped making games. I have the greatest respect for anyone who has the stamina, the staying power, and the focus to make more than one game, because it takes 3 years and you're in the same room with the same people every day. I'm not sure they told you that when you started this education. Anyway, so maybe to some extent Rock Manager can have inspired or predicted some of the music games that came after and were much more successful. SingStar and Guitar Hero and all those. Not that they send me any royalty checks. Do you know this person? Stefan, you can't answer. Yes. Yes, but I just said you can't answer. Who knows this person? Nobody? Any guesses? Have you played a little game called Just Cause? Have you played a little game called Mad Max? Yeah, so what studio is that? Yes, all right. So this is Kristoffer Sundberg, who's the co-founder and creative director at Avalanche. And do you see where he is? Do you know where this photo is from? Times Square, yes. 12 points. Times Square. So this is from a trade delegation a few years ago with the Swedish Minister of Trade and Kristoffer Sundberg and some other companies, and they rang the bell at Nasdaq to start the day's trade in shares of those publicly traded companies, whatever. I like to show this picture because this is like the peak of capitalism. If you have appeared on the big screen in Times Square, you can't go any further, any higher. There's no higher peak for money. So we have accomplished that, right? This is the most recognition you can get from the world of finance. So this was not always the case. Games were not always a big industry with lots of money in it. And I'll get back to the money in a second. But first, I think you know some of these games. I like to show this slide to people who are not from Sweden, just to show that some of the games that they know but maybe don't know or didn't know are made in Sweden are actually from here. For example, Angry Birds. A lot of people think about Angry Birds as a Finnish game. But Angry Birds 2 was made in Stockholm, at Rovio Stockholm. Don't tell my Finnish industry colleagues that it's touchy for them, very sensitive. And also I like to show this image to people who have no or little experience of games on their own, because this, I think you will agree that this shows the variety of different games and genres and flavors and kinds of gameplay and graphic styles and whatnot. So there's a huge variety now in the Swedish games industry. If you don't agree, actually, if you don't agree with something I say, let me know. Raise your hand, holler. We have a mic. Throw something at me, because it's fun if you disagree. If you agree, that's great, but it's more fun if you disagree. And have you noticed the little caption at the bottom of this picture? Not our logo, the one that says that every 10th person on the planet has played a Swedish game. It's we did the numbers, and it's a conservative estimate. So next time we hope to reach 1 billion. We can only do that if you make really great games that attract lots of players. So you will not only be helping yourselves, you will also be helping the secretariat. Questions? All right. This is a beautiful slide. Can you read it? If you want to dig deeper into the numbers, you can go into dataspelsbranschen.se and find our report, and you can read it for yourselves, all the details about this. But let me point to a couple of things. So the green bars, that's the turnover, that's the revenue, the income for the companies. And as you can see, it's grown 8 times in 5 years, or actually 4 years. A lot of that is going to be King and Mojang. But even if we take out those, the industry economy has tripled in 4 years. And the blue bars, those are the numbers of people working in the industry. And actually, you know, the scale starts from 0. A lot of times there will be like a jump in the scale to make the bars more dramatic, but we don't use tricks like that at the Games Industry Secretariat. We play it straight. And as you can see, the number of people working in the industry has tripled in 4 years. Did you watch the television news on Friday? There was a report from I'm sure you did. You were on television. This expo was on television last Friday, right? Who watched that segment? Yes, pretty much all of you. Okay, great. I did too. And the reporter said it's a tough job market out there. He said it's a tough job market. Do you think it's a tough job market? You think it's a tough job market? You don't know a tough job market. That's not a tough job market that triples in 4 years. That's the opposite of a tough job market. You have a world of opportunity when you graduate. You can go to Australia, you can go to California like Richard, you can go to Sundsvall with Patrick Hansson, you can go anywhere. And there's I wouldn't say all, but many of our members are hunting for new talent. They're desperate to hire more people. So if that's a tough job market, I'd like to ask this television reporter how he feels about, journalism. I didn't break out those bars, but it has a separate page in our report. The gender equality, the number of women employed in the industry. But if you look at the bottom line in the table, the spreadsheet up there, You can see that the proportion of women is still very low. It's only 18% of the full-time employees in 2014. Oh, by the way, the 2015 numbers will be made public after summer. We're still working on collecting all that data and analyzing it. But there's hope, though, because if you look at the far right, you'll see that in 2010 it was only 10% women. And if you look at the number of women, it's grown from 121 to 583, so that's almost a 400% increase in 4 years. So this tells me at least that there's more and more women considering games as an option for a career. And also, it also tells me that we have more work to do. Questions? Yes. Just say it and I'll repeat it. Oh, there's a mic coming. Okay, so don't do what he says, not what I say.
I read an article that the women in this business often get the administrative roles in the game industry. Is that still the case, or how is the proportion with?
Oh, you mean what type of jobs? If women are underrepresented in some positions and overrepresented in some. We don't have those exact numbers. We know a little bit about that from surveys with members, but we can't extract that from this. These numbers are from the book filings, årsbokslut. But I hear that question sometimes, and it might be true that there is some overrepresentation, or that's not correct. There are proportionally more women working in administrative roles than in development roles, maybe. And if you look at the top management, at least at the CEO level, women are very underrepresented, much more underrepresented than these numbers indicate. But I think it would be unfair to draw the conclusion that if you're a head of finance, if you're a head of marketing, if you're a head of HR, something that you would have less influence than a developer. In fact, those roles are typically more influential to the strategies and the businesses of the company, and not least to the practices. And I mean, there's a lot to be said about this. This is just kind of an indication. It would be also very interesting to look at opportunities for women. Do women have the same opportunity to develop their careers as men, but we don't really have that data. So if you have input, I'd love to hear it. If you want to do a research project on that particular topic, I'd love to be part of that.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. All right, more comments? Yes?
Wait for the mic.
Wait for the mic. I'll just do my little pause dance while we...
So I'm curious if the amount of employees are just developers, or if it's also like HR and marketing and such.
Yes, so this number is just the number of full-time employees, as indicated in the book returns, in the annual books of the company. So it doesn't say anything about their jobs or anything like that. It also does not include consultants. So actually the number of people working in the games industry is much higher than this, but we don't know how many consultants work in these companies.
So like external artists or external marketing are not counted?
Unless they're employed by a company that's particular to the games industry and only do consultancy services for games developers, because then they will be included in our numbers.
All right, thank you.
Sure, thanks. And if you, again, if you want to, I have a couple of copies. Anton, where are you? Did you bring some copies of our index? Great. So Anton is the young man with the checkered shirt there, so easy on the eyes. Go see him for your own copy if you want to read more. And also it's available as PDF online. All right. So, you know this person, he made a little game called Minecraft. He sold it to a little company called Microsoft. Do you know how many dollars? Well, it says there, $2.5 billion. That's A lot of money. Just to put that into perspective, there's a little car company in Sweden called Volvo, and that was sold to the Chinese car maker Geely in 2010. Do you know how much Geely paid for Volvo cars? I mean, we're talking about the crown jewel of Swedish industrialism here. 5 billion? No money. Oh, right. 5 yuan, maybe, yeah. Renminbi. No, they did a little better than that. It's 1.8 billion, $1.8 billion. So that's why I say blocks over cars. And there was another acquisition the year after for Candy Crush. And so these are some of the biggest deals in the Swedish business life at all. So I made this point already with the Times Square shot, but this is something I use to impress finance people about the opportunity in games. And you can use it too now. You can talk about blocks over cars and these numbers I just told you. And there was another acquisition 2 weeks ago. Does somebody know what that was? They don't make games, they say they make digital toys. Second only to Disney in the child's app space. Toca Boca, that's right. And who bought them? Yes, that's right, Canadian, Spin Master. They didn't say the money they paid. They didn't say the acquisition sum. But if you know it, send a note to me or something because I'd like to find out. So there's more acquisitions like this. And now you ask, don't the Swedish companies buy any overseas companies? Yes, they do. Starbreeze has bought quite a few actually. So it goes in both directions. Yes, questions. You were first.
Yeah, I think we should be careful not to necessarily conflate revenue with how easy or difficult an industry is to enter on. The film industry is making record revenue year over year, just absolutely exponential increases. That doesn't mean it's at all easier to enter the film industry. If Adam Sandler takes 21 million for directing, I say that very leniently, a film, that doesn't mean that it's easy to become Adam Sandler. And I think that with these conglomeration that we see happening, a lot of that is this effect of where you have small startups, but they're bought out by massive multinational corporations like Microsoft, and that is market cleaning. Rather than look at these opportunities, you can be, everyone wants to be Mojang. Everyone wants to be Notch, but there is one Notch, and we could look at how much revenue is increasing for oil companies. That doesn't mean it's easy to become an oil baron, you know what I mean? And I do think that obviously it's wonderful that the industry is bigger, and it is a huge industry, and there's a lot of opportunities, but the population is also exponentially increasing, and the amount of people with higher education degrees is, massive compared to even 15 years ago. So yeah, those are kind of mine.
Okay, thank you very much. Yeah, those are some great points. First of all, there's only one Notch, and he did something great, not only a great game, he also kept his this image that he was indie, despite all the millions he made, right? Even before he sold his company, he made billions, but he still appeared indie, like he didn't care about business. And that's great. I really appreciate how he could juggle those two, because, come on, he's a super smart businessman. If you look at his marketing strategies, if you look at his monetization strategies, if you look at how he invited the players to become ambassadors and sell the game for him, he's a super smart businessman, probably one of the best. You could almost argue he's probably an even better game designer or game creator than a businessman. But it's not like, I mean, he didn't broadcast himself. Notch didn't broadcast himself as a businessman. He actually played down that. He didn't want to look like a businessman, but he's a super smart businessman. So if you want to be the next Notch or anywhere near, you can still do that. You can still pretend you're not a businessman or business person, but you have to actually be one and be able to juggle those two identities. That's really important. Don't believe this idea that you can be indie and you can make billions without any compromise. You can still be indie, but you have to be super smart about your business. So that's the first point I take away from that. The second point, well, maybe some parts of the movie industry is doing great, but actually the Swedish producers are not doing great. They lost 25% of their revenue in 12 months in 2013, and that's because the DVD market is gone, mainly to piracy and also because the legal streaming services haven't picked up yet. But if you take that, if you take that argument you made and apply it to these numbers, I would still argue that there is more opportunity in the games industry than in the oil industry, for example, even if that might, I don't know about the oil price, it's bouncing back up, right? But if you look at the number of new companies, so back in 2010 we had 106 companies, and in 2014 it's 214, so that number has doubled. The number of companies has doubled in 4 years. Who cares if they're not making any money? Who cares how many they are? Well, it turns out that a majority of the companies in our survey are in the black. So a majority of them make money. So I appreciate the attempt, but yes, it's a great industry, and you're all welcome to join it.
Oh, I agree. It is a great industry. I didn't mean to suggest that it wasn't at all. Absolutely, and it is a huge industry.
But I think maybe if I may add one thing, there is growth because there are more players. Like you said about the demographics, there are more players joining. We used to think of ourselves as being nerds, making games for other nerds. And then we started making games for nerds all over the world, and that was great too. And now we make games for everybody. And there's still a lot of people out there who haven't yet discovered the beauty of playing digital games. So the 700 million will be 1 billion within a couple of years, and who knows what's next. So there's really no competition. We compete between companies for the best talent, and we compete maybe for publisher contracts, but that's pretty unusual. We compete for attention, but there's plenty of fish for everybody. That's not saying you can just put your skates out there, like they say in hockey. You have to really do the work and be smart about it. Okay, I'm taking too much time now. You all want to hear the panel and not my theories about the games business. There was one more question. Do you still want to ask that? No? Okay. So I intimidated you, sorry. All right. So I'll just skip my thing about how Mulle Meck was a great game in '98 and Minecraft has a lot in common with that. And I'll skip the thing about how it's great to have an active user culture and that can spawn new kinds of phenomena, and look to the success story, the secrets to the success. So if you want to have a successful, I'm now going to pretend that you're government people and you came to me for some reason to look for answers how to build a successful games industry in your country. There are some basic requirements. These things have to be in place in order to have a games industry at all. You must have a good IT skills and active, there needs to be computers and computer skills in the population, so that's the top left. The bottom left is fiber. You have to have broadband. You need good IT infrastructure, internet. That's great, but that's not going to make your games industry happen. That exists in many, many places. Center bottom, that's international airports, because we're a global industry, you need connections. Bottom right is education. You need good educations, like, you know, you're all an example of that. Without educations, you can really have no games industry. The top right, I struggle to find a good image to illustrate this, but that's freedom of speech and freedom of enterprise. So unless you have freedom of speech, you can't really make great games for the global audience. And obviously it's a business after all. And maybe I'm giving away too much of my childhood here, but the top center, that's He-Man and the Masters of the Universe, because you need access to the global or Western popular culture, because that's the audience that you're going to cater to. All these things are necessary. If you don't have these things, you're not going to have a games industry. But on their own, they're not going to make a successful games industry. You also need an edge. So here are some things that Sweden has that might be an edge. We have a very small home market. A lot of people see that as a disadvantage. We don't. It's great if you want to soft launch your games and try it on a small audience before throwing away your global release. So that's great. But also, because what I said before about being nerds making games for other nerds, the small audience made us look outside Sweden at a very, very early stage. Stefan, you can testify to that. Avalanche made great games because you approached the global market. Yeah, okay. Thumbs up, thank you. I'll run through this a little fast. You might not see that here in Visby, but actually the climate is useless, so that's great because then you can focus on bigger things like making games. We have a social security net, which means that you can be early 20s and just sort of float around and do nothing, and then wake up to the fact that your destiny is to become a game developer. We have job security, so you can be part of the team, you can be a full-time employee, and you can also be critical of what's happening in the organization, and that helps the organization evolve. So job security is a great thing for employers as well as employees. Also, this contributes to the organization culture that tends to prevail in Sweden. We're really good at teamwork, and games, I would argue at least, we can debate about this on the panel, but it's very much a team effort. If you're a game company and you have a great team, it's actually the team you're selling more than the product or the trademarks or whatever. Oh, sorry, this is, you're too young for this. Do you know what this is? Did you follow this? Ravelli, yeah, Thomas Ravelli. You've seen in commercials, probably. This is the bronze winning football team of 1994, that's right. And they were maybe not the greatest players in the world, but they were, well, the third greatest team, because they played as a team, not as individuals. That's how an unlikely bumblebee like the Swedish football team could fly and win the bronze. Also, going back in culture, we can thank Martin Luther for a lot because we focus on the negative. We're never happy. We can always do better, right? This is great if you're crushing bugs and tweaking game balance, right? And also, you know, Luther tells you it's hard work now, but there's going to be a reward in the next life, that is post-release. Now. These days, games are services, so there's no real release. They just keep going, so there's no hope. But at least there's negativity that you can focus on. And also, we have really poor self-esteem, and that's thanks to the Jante law. So we don't need our bosses to tell us we suck. We tell ourselves that we're not good enough, that we have to try harder. And that's the exact right attitude if you want to be a great game developer. Just two more things. Tracing the roots of the Swedish games industry, there are two things that all the big companies, there's a new wave of companies I realize, but all the big Swedish game companies, Avalanche, DICE, King, Mojang, all of them have in common, and that's their founders grew up with Commodore 64 and Drakar och Demoner. Commodore 64 and the Amiga and the Spectrum, they created a generation of self-taught programmers, and the pen and paper role-playing games created a generation of self-taught game makers. And for reasons beyond me, these two artifacts of popular culture from the 80s were insanely popular in Sweden more than other places. So we owe a lot to the people who brought these products to Sweden, because they laid the foundation of what today is the Swedish games industry. So those those are my theories about why we made it so great. Obviously, the next question is, how can we sustain this? And I look to you to answer that. And if you have more theories, let me know. I'm always collecting theories about the roots and the success cases. But I will leave you with that, unless somebody has a disagreement to voice. Yes. Demo parties, absolutely. Demo parties. Yes. The demo parties, early example of user culture that grew around the Commodore 64, in particular the Amiga. A lot of the great games companies grew out of that scene, the demo scene. Absolutely, and that it also created sort of an ethics in development where you had to make something greater than the technology or the hardware could, at least from the first look, sustain. Right? You had to do more. You learned to push the hardware to the next level. I don't know if that's a challenge anymore. You guys have such great processors and stuff, but I tell you, when you're trying to do a music editor in Macromedia Director, it's great to have that mentality from the demo scene. Anyway, all right, so this was my little talk. This is just the warm-up, the opening act for the real show, because now I'd like to invite my panelists to join me on stage. So first, you know him from this morning, Richard Lemarchand.